Welcome to The Journey. I'm Julieann Hartman, and thank you so much for joining me today for another amazing show, because I have an amazing guest on this show that has a crazy story. Matter of fact, it's so crazy that she sent me 6 pages of everything that has happened to her, a timeline of all the ridiculous things that has happened to her and her family. But God, right, who changed everything in her life. And so I'm so proud to announce to you our friend, Linda Reuter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Julieann. It's an honor and a privilege to be here.
So, okay, we have a lot to talk about because, like I said, I've got 6 pages here of just horrific stuff. So let's start with this. Where do you come from? Was there Jesus in your home? And let's start with your background.
Okay. Well, I was raised in a home in Washington State, south of Seattle, and we were what I would call a Christian home. We visited church. It was a very legalistic church, but Christ was in the home, even if it wasn't in a salvation way. But we heard about him. My grandma was very influential in our lives, and we would have they called them workers. There was 2 instead of pastors that would come, and they would come. I was very young. They would come to the home and do Bible studies with my parents. And I wanted so desperately to be a part of those Bible studies, but that was just for the adults. And so, but I had such a hunger for the Lord that I was determined to be a part of those. And I was a very obedient, as children go, rule following, yet there was just such a hunger to hear more about the Lord. And so I devised a plan. We had walkie-talkies, and I figured out how to get the walkie-talkie to stay with the mic, the button depressed. And then I had to get out there and find a subtle way to stash it in an area that it wouldn't be seen, but it would be close enough so I could pick up what was being said. And then I had to come up week by week with a new way of bribing my little sister to not say anything. So,
oh my gosh, that is so cute. So we love grandmas. It seems like a lot of our stories, except not my story, but most stories I hear is that grandma was the one that was praying and being influential. Now, what's a little odd is that you said this word, we visited church and the workers came. Like that you don't hear that very often. And the visiting the church would mean like, you maybe weren't members, or it was just a kind of a whole different setup, the way that they ran their church. Can you explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it was a very different setup. They were called the Faith, and we would meet Sunday mornings. We would meet in people's homes, and then there was no church building. There was sometimes they would rent a location in a gym or something like that, or it might be in somebody's home. And so it wasn't typical church as we know it.
Well, that's interesting because it's kind of, how many years ago was that?
Oh, that's been 40 years ago.
Well, it looks like churches are kind of going back to that.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, being in church homes instead of the big building, right? Because that's right. That's where we can see the presence of the Lord so much easier and feel the tangible presence of him when we are in smaller gatherings and not this big mega churches. And I'm nothing against that. Mega churches are, they're needed, but boy, there's nothing better than that intimacy that comes into like a home or a smaller space.
Yes.
So, okay. So what I love is hearing that at such a young age, you were seeking the Lord so much. You were seeking, now, were you seeking information, his love? What did you think you wanted to get out of that as a child?
You know, I don't know that I ever thought about the end result. I seemed to have a relationship with him very young, even though I didn't really understand that that's what it was. I got saved actually at age 7 by saying that little prayer. It used to be printed in the New England Primer. Then now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And my dad had taught me that, who had been taught by his parents. And one night at 7 years old, as I was praying it rotely, I contemplated those words and I went, well, if I die before I wake, I don't really want to die when I go to sleep. But if I do, yeah, I want Jesus to take me to heaven. And so it was then that I asked him to save me, to take me to heaven when I die. And so, and I can remember thinking that, it should bring my parents peace too, to know, because obviously they would know, since they taught me the prayer, that I was in heaven if something ever happened to me.
Wow. All right. So from that point forward, did you guys stay in that legalistic church? And also, can you define legalism?
Yes, it was about doing and the behaviors, how do things look? And always worried about the appearance of our behavior to others. The women wore their hair long and up in buns, long skirts, and so very much about the appearance of things. And whether it was preached or taught or what have you, I couldn't tell you, because I was pretty young, but that is what I received. That's how I interpreted things while I was there. And so it was about your actions, not relationship, but it was, and it caused me to view the Bible more as an instruction manual than a love letter. And I can remember thinking that, when I started learning about Jesus later, when I went to another church years later, I can remember, because of that foundation I had, I saw Christ, or saw God as the angry father in the corner of heaven, trying to throw lightning bolts at me. And Jesus was going, no, I got this one. I got that one too, Lord. Remember, she's mine. I got it. Whoa, that one was close. And so that was the perspective that I had.
All right. Well, that's awesome. So now let's move forward a little bit. You getting into junior high, high school. Were you homeschooled? Were you, did you go to public school? Like, what started happening when you started going into the world?
I was in public school, and my mom was very involved. And we actually, in the home, had kind of a beaver cleaver feel to the home. And then when in the end of junior high, first part of high school, my parents got divorced, and my friends were absolutely shocked, because no, not your family, you have the perfect family. But even in perfect families, there's imperfections. And so that really was a very confusing time, because I was raised in a very strict home with lots of scaffolding, so to speak, around. And then when adults get into their own thing, a lot of times the children aren't considered and end up going into the cracks. And my sister went into a negative direction. And I went from having all kinds of structure and security around me to none. And the adults in my life were making poor choices and kind of stepping up and taking that adult role. And it was just, it was a very interesting time.
Wow. Okay. So, man, I hate hearing that. It's like, don't we know that there's an enemy out there that's going to try to destroy something like that? That's why yes. I thank God that we, on this platform on Healing Journeys today, my husband and I, we do a teaching on marriage, just to help people in, resolving issues and all that, so it doesn't have to lead to divorce, Right. So you're saying that your sister kind of went off on a different direction. How did you survive this? And did you also kind of go off the rails as well?
There was probably about a 6-month period that I went a little crazy. Praise God, I never got into drugs, but there's plenty of other poor choices to make. in that period. But there's no peace in that and no happiness in it. It's just actions and responding to what others are expecting. And I lived in that for a very long time. My greatest fear was disappointing people. And so that puts you in a very difficult, in difficult situations.
Well, you're a people pleaser. You're trying to please
Yes.
everybody. And we know that that's very dangerous.
Yes.
On your outline, you start now timelining everything that happened to you. But before we go to that timeline, I see that you have 5 kids. So obviously there was a marriage in there somewhere. How did you meet your husband, and how old were you?
I actually met my husband in high school, and but we didn't date then. It was actually saw each other at Safeway, and he
Wait, it was a what? It was what?
It was we ran into each other at Safeway once, and he had asked if I wanted to go out, and I said, well, sure. And I was actually kind of in the habit of canceling first dates because I really wasn't interested in dating. But again, I didn't learn to say no, and no never really had a meaning anyway. So I just agreed, and then I had a reason to have to cancel. And I told him, and it was true, but I told him, I said, hey, my parents are out of town. I got to get back in. They're going to be coming back into town, and I've got to get everything cleaned up and ready for them to come back. So I'm going to have to cancel. And he came out to the house to visit while I cleaned. So I went, well, that didn't work. So we ended up married 3 years after I graduated high school, and started a family right away. So we were fairly young. I had just turned 21.
Wow.
And had my son not full 9 months after we were married. And when he was born, the cord was wrapped around his throat. And so they had to open the NICU right there. It was amazing. The one of the closets in the delivery room just opened up, and there was a small emergency room right there. And so that was pretty incredible. But they got him breathing quickly. I had a great doctor, and I even had difficulties during delivery. But in that time, even the presence of the Lord was so real. It was like it was just he and I in the room. The monitors weren't picking up contractions, and so I had to indicate when I was having a contraction. But everything was so out of whack that I just really wasn't even able to talk. And he was not breached, but his head was facing the wrong direction. And so they were trying to get him to turn. And my body started pushing too soon. I had gone from 90% of face to 80%, and my dilation went backwards even. And so there was some things and so my mom was in the room with me, and when I was having a contraction, I would open my eyes and try to make eye contact with her, and that would indicate that I was having a contraction. But then I would go close my eyes again, and I just talked with the Lord, and my senses were so heightened that anybody touching me was painful. So, but it was just the Lord and I, and he held my hand through the delivery, and I said, okay, here it comes again, and he was there holding my hand. And so that was a precious time.
Wow. All right. Now, because I do want to get some more background, your husband, You guys got married. And what was your relationship like before? Well, you started having kids right away. But so now what is your relationship like while you're, getting to know each other, married, and also starting a family?
Yeah, it's not easy to start off with kids right away, especially being young. We hadn't dated very long, maybe a year. And that really is not enough time to get to know someone. And
I am so glad you said that, because I feel the same way. These kids, these young kids these days, they don't believe this. And so they're like, well, look at so-and-so. They've been married 45 years. And I'm like, yeah, are they happy? Because maybe the first 10 years wasn't the easiest, but I thank you for saying that.
Yeah, and it's not just your spouse that you have to get to know. Family plays a dynamic in that as well.
Oh, yes, you are absolutely right.
Both sides. And so, there's a lot more to getting married than your heart beating when they enter into a room. And it's about staying power. And so there was a lot of growing up while I was trying to raise kids. And then, his parents had been divorced as well. And there was, he needed healing in a lot of areas and in relationships. And so while he's yearning for a relationship with his dad, he was perpetuating the cycle. And I said, do what you can there, but you can't leave our children in the position that you're in. So while you're seeking a relationship with your dad at this stage in life, it's causing neglect in the relationship with your children. So it was, being a husband and a father was just a lot more responsibility than he was ready for. And we have 4 boys and a girl, and they all had different diagnoses of their own. And that is a lot when you have a healthy, happy marriage. And when you don't, it's all the more difficult. And I think that the pressure of it all and the responsibility was just a little much. And so we ended up divorcing after 14 years of marriage.
Oh gosh, I'm really sorry to hear that. So you're saying that your marriage was pretty healthy, was pretty great, and then as each kid came, they came with a diagnosis, which really put a strain on the relationship, because you're also trying to get to know your spouse. And a year isn't enough time. We need to meet. 10 years is too long, but 1 year, it needs to be more than that, because we don't.
Yes. Yeah.
You're now going to be living with somebody that you just never knew. Like, you don't know the inner workings of a person until you live with them. Right?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. But, and okay, I wouldn't say that we had a healthy marriage, but it wasn't ugly either. It was passable by the world's standards. And the truth of it is, and this is what I had to tell the kids when it came time to it, the truth of it is, a marriage takes 3. It takes the husband, the wife, and the Lord. And we never had all 3 working together at the same time.
Okay. Well, now, so did you carry on at the legalistic church, or did you guys find another church? Was he a believer?
No, I didn't carry on there. And actually, when my parents divorced, we left the church. Shortly before that, actually, I can remember asking at my 13th birthday, all I wanted was to go to church. That's all I wanted for my birthday. Just let me go to church. So it was around that time that we had stopped going to church, and then they divorced when I was 15. And so we had been out of that church for a long time. And then there kind of wasn't a church. And then I'd been kind of seeking a church. And then when we were married, he wasn't raised in church. In fact, when we got together, he was more interested in like shamanism and that kind of thing. He didn't really have any direction. And so, but it was very important to me that we get into a church right away and that we raise our kids in church. And so we went to go visit a couple churches, and then it was a friend of the family had invited us. It was actually my mom's then husband. It was a family member of theirs was going to be getting baptized. and it was at an independent fundamental Baptist church, and in a small town nearby. And so we went out there to support that and liked the church. And so that's where we ended up staying, and where I went forward again for salvation, because I didn't have enough understanding yet to know that when I was 7 is actually when I accepted him as my Savior, and got baptized there. So it was shortly after we were married. And so that's where we were when I raised my family. And a couple of my boys, they're still in the area, still go to that church. So it's been great.
Oh, wow. Well, that's okay. So then did he give up the shamanism, or was that still kind of lingering?
I think that it wasn't present. He wasn't really involved in it. He was just kind of curious. It made sense to him. There was a small amount of Native American in his heritage. And so I think that that's probably what drew him to that. So, but yeah, he didn't stay involved with that. But on a lighthearted kind of note, when I had my first son, just in jest, but this goes to the power of our words, just in jest, I said, this is my son's name, but in honor of his Native American heritage, his Native American name is Grunts with Red Face. And, thought that was humorous, until later he ends up with one of his diagnoses was fecal retention. And so there's power in our words, even when we're just trying to be funny.
Okay, wait. So you're saying that you gave him a Native American name runs with red face, and
no, grunts with red face.
Oh, grunts with red face.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Wow,
yeah.
That's interesting. And then later on, the renal failure.
Well, that was before the renal failure. When he was very little, it was but fecal retention.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Oh
yeah.
my gosh.
Yes.
All right.
So there's power in our words. Our words carry life or they carry death. There's no in between.
Another thing that you just said, and I'm so appreciative, because people go, "Oh, Julieann, you're too strict." I'm like, no. We have to be careful what we say, because we will have whatever we say. And guess who said that? Not me. Jesus said that you will have whatever you say.
Yes.
Okay, so your first son is born, and he's got the cord wrapped around his neck, and and tell us what else was wrong with him.
So at that stage, that's all we knew, and he was a very happy boy. But he also had reflux, and he could projectile vomit like a champion, and he got more than one passerby, and but outgrew that when he was 6 months old. But he was very quiet. In fact, so quiet that you'd have to watch the clock and feed him sometimes, because he just wouldn't make much of a fuss. And so very, very peaceful and happy when he was little. Later, there was a lot of anger that came forth, and some rage that would come out. And when I had my second son, at one time he even, and there's only 2 years between them, so he was a pretty strong little boy. He picked up the high chair and threw it in rage. And so there was a lot of that we dealt with, which I had homeschooled for a while at first, and then I was convinced that this public schools would have more resources, and that just ended up being a big headache and more responsibility than actually schooling them at home. The Lord gives you what you need. There is a grace that he gives you for the jobs that you have to do, and so he gives us everything we need to raise the children that we have. And the schools don't have that grace.
Oh,
and so
absolutely not.
Yeah.
So you're saying that you started noticing some anger issues, and they would just come on like for nothing. There was no reason behind it, or did you see like patterns starting to develop?
No, it didn't seem to be a whole lot of reason for them. But he would go through this. The thing we noticed first is he'd go through this little routine right before he ate. We happened to be at a well child visit, and the doctor says, anything else going on? I went, well, actually, he started doing this it's like a routine before he eats. And I displayed it for him. And I said, and it's every time. And he goes, really? Well, what else does he do? And he goes, does he make noise? I said, oh yeah, he makes this noise, that noise. And I just figured he was an active boy. And so that's when he actually ended up getting his diagnosis of Tourette's. We went through the process and then was referred over to a psychiatrist, and they did all the testing and everything. And so he was given a diagnosis of Tourette's. And so some of that anger piece kind of came along with that. So, and he said he's at a saturated frustration level. When he wakes up in the morning, he's all ready to hear. He says, so anything else on top of that just brings the explosion.
Wow. Okay. I don't really know too much about Tourette's. So what age are you telling me that you started noticing this?
He was around 5 or 6, I think, somewhere in that age range.
And then, so what do you do with that? You've got other kids now. You have probably a brother, and then you have
Yes.
more coming, or maybe there was already more. How did you deal with this? Because you know that this is going to affect everybody.
Yes. Yeah. And you just learn what is part of that. But for me, even though I didn't understand any of the healing things or how to speak any of that over him, I knew that it wasn't going to be an excuse. I could understand what would cause behavior, but it wasn't going to be an excuse for anything. And in fact, later when he was given the diagnosis of the ADD, and for him, the diagnoses just seemed to keep piling up. But when he was given that diagnosis, I had told him to go clean his room. And half hour later, I hadn't heard anything, went in. I'm like, there was nothing done. I said, son, I asked you to do this. But you haven't done anything. What's going on? He says, well, Mom, I have ADD. And I said, oh, and he kind of had a smirk. And I went, oh, you know what? I heard that. I said, you know what that means? And then the smirk, because it looks like he's going to get away with something, the smirk he's trying not to grin, but it's coming. And I said, you know what that means? He goes, what? I said, that means that you should it's going to take you a little longer than others. So you should probably get started sooner than later.
You used it against him.
Yeah. So it wasn't going to be an excuse. So you just try to mitigate, you learn what you can about what's going on. And then one of my concerns was the foul language. Am I going to deal with this? It's not in our TV. We had a filter for the TV. I said, it's not in our music. It's not in our environment. And he said, the doctor shared that that's just one symptom. And for every face that has Tourette's, there's a different look to Tourette's. There's some commonalities, but they all have a different personality. And so he says, I don't think that you're going to have to deal with that, but there's other things. And so you can, a lot of times with that, it's about how the word coming out feels, how it shapes in the mouth. And so if you can find something similar, find whichever sound it is that is bringing that forth, find a different word, and then you can kind of retrain that. And the symptoms, they'll evolve. They kind of start at the head and kind of work their way down. And by about the age of 20, they've kind of settled into where they're going to be.
Well, okay, this is really interesting. And we're out of time, so we're going to have to cut this. Thank you so much, Linda, for coming on and sharing your life story. We've got lots more to cover and talk about. Please come to the next episode with us next week so you can watch what's going on and what God has done in Linda's life. So thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next time on The Journey. Bye-bye.